In this podcast, I'm sharing something that I've never shared before, and it's because of a massive breakthrough. We have something to celebrate, you and I together, but in my family as well. So you won't believe what happened. My son is now in month 2 of living completely independently. That's right. It's something I never thought would happen, but we were put in a situation where he had to for a while. And he's doing amazingly. So he's in the tiny home. He's planning, he's making food plans, he's controlling his own financials, he is cooking for himself, he is exercising, he gets up early in the morning. He creates meal plans and plans out his meals throughout the week, and he's in control of his budget. This is a huge milestone, my sister. This is where I want you to get to, and this is something that has taken us over 20 years. So today I'm going to celebrate by sharing the complete timeline for my son's turnaround recovery process. Right from the day we got the diagnosis, what did we do and what changes did we see? Exactly when did it happen, and also to bring you hope, to tell you what can I do when people tell me there's nothing I can do about the autism symptoms or ADHD symptoms. What can I do? What did I do? What can you do? What is it that's missing links out there in protocols and practitioners and other moms' approach, and the real reason why you're not seeing results? And so stick to the end, because by the end of this I have a surprise for you. So my son has also shared what it's been like for him to get to this milestone. So there's an interview with him, and I'll share at the end of this video what that is, how you can access that. Plus I share the breakdown of the 6 most important keys that you need to implement to turn symptoms around as quickly as possible, to get your child to as much independence as possible, to get peace for yourself and your child, and to look into the future without this fear of whether or not your child will be able to manage without you. That's been my goal since day one, and I'm going to share with you what did I do so that you can mimic that and copy that. So let's get to it. This is one of the most exciting things I've ever had to share, and it's all full of positive tips and hope for you. Nothing negative in this podcast episode. Let's go. I have my notes here. I am in my youngest son's room. So you might be seeing some of his things in the background. And just as I was recording, I got all my notes here, sitting on the bed. I realized how significant this is. And so I feel like I need to take a moment to thank God for this, because I just realized I'm at end goal now. Everything that they told me couldn't be done is now what is happened. The miraculous healing that shouldn't be possible. My son living independently, taking care of his finances, meal planning, living a neurotypical life, having his own job, going to church, planning, getting up early in the morning, taking care of the dog. The things that I have worked towards, and the steps that God has revealed to me, even before I knew him, even when I was rebellious against God, it's now fulfilled. And so I just want to thank God for making this possible, and for using a dreadful situation for good, to inspire and motivate other people, to inspire and motivate you as a mom. Maybe you're sitting out there, maybe you just got the diagnosis, maybe you're drowning in tears and tantrums, maybe you never sleep, maybe you've lost hope because your child's symptoms are so extreme. So it's just wild that this story, this child, this boy, this man, this young man, his story of transformation can now serve as hope and proof that when they tell you there's nothing you can do, you don't need to believe it, but you do need to have faith in God. That's one thing I want to tell you, though. So I want to take you back to the beginning. I had my child, it was my first child, at the back end of a very unhealthy youth. So I come from quite traumatized, dysfunctional background, and I had been living a pretty unhealthy life, emotionally, physically, practically, throughout my teens and 20s. And so the things that I did, the choices that I made and didn't make, the foods that I ate, the thoughts that I was thinking, the ungodly behaviors that I was engaging in, was part of the problem that then led to autism later on down the track. And I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, but I was so detached from myself and from God and from my body, from being able to feel anything, that I just did what everybody else told me to do. I felt this huge no inside of me when my child was given the V. And that's one of the things that I haven't talked about, and probably the most common question that I got was, did my child get V'd? You know what I mean. If you're an autism mom, you know what I mean. And you know why I can't say the word, because it's banned everywhere. So when he got that, and when he was introduced to formula, and when he was introduced to baby food, and when he got antibiotics for all the side effects of all the things, I had felt this no inside me so many times, but I didn't listen to it because I was so detached. I was so numb. I was so numbed out from running from my feelings and my trauma and the sensations I had in my body, and that big hole in my heart that I tried to fill with alcohol and food and eating and binging and escape mechanisms and other people, and later New Age practices. That hole wasn't filled until God filled it, because that's a God-shaped hole that's in all of our hearts. And I'll get to how that can lead to symptoms later on. But my son regressed, so he developed normally. He met all his milestones as a baby. No remarks. He was very tiny when he was born, though, and the placenta was completely destroyed when he was born, so he hadn't had the nutrition that he needed. But that was not the reason why he regressed. He regressed later on. But when he had his last V in the Child V program, I took him to the doctor, and he was actually sick that day. He had an infection, and he was ill. But the doctor chose to vaccinate anyway. I said the word. Maybe we need to beep that out. And he came home, and he got more and more ill. And he developed a fever. And all of a sudden, he turned blue. He started foaming. His eyes went white, like he had the white out. He looked like, I don't know, he looked like he was dying. We totally panicked. We called an ambulance, 911, to the hospital. I can't even remember that ride to the emergency room, where he came back around. But he was hit hard. And I did not link it to the V at that time, or even, it would take a long time for me to link it to that V. And I will say, before you jump to conclusions, I do not consider that to be the cause for autism symptoms. And I will say this, I needed that V in order for me to wake up from my slumber. I needed my child to get that ill and that sick for me to finally change my ways, wake up, stop numbing myself out, stop destroying myself, stop running away from my heart and my pain and my trauma, and actually start parenting myself and my child and become the mother that I was supposed to be. But it was part of the reason why my son regressed terribly. And with symptoms like autism, ADHD, and anxiety and depression, which is what I was dealing with, aggression, agitation, lack of focus, lack of learning, lack of development, lack of behavior. It's never a one cause, one solution kind of thing. And I will get to what causes symptoms and what can you do about them at the end of this podcast. So stick to the end and hear me out. So I need to keep the focus here because I want this podcast to be all about the timeline for the turnaround process that is applicable to you and bring you hope, tell you about the missing links. That's a reason why people don't see turnarounds typically in the community for children with autism. But I just want to touch on the V because there's a lot of moms who get bogged down and fixated on the topic of the V causing autism. It is my experience now, as I've been walking through this with my son for decades, as I've been working with and am in daily contact with thousands of autism moms who do the same, who turn symptoms around for their children. The thing you have to understand is it's never a one cause, one solution kind of deal with autism symptoms. We have to talk about this in a different way. We have to name it autisms. And while insults, epigenetic insults, such as environment, drinking water, food, V's, medication, whatever you want to talk about, might contribute to the load where this is your child, this is a stool of life, these are nails sticking up. That's sticking up, irritating your child, so that when your child is sitting on this stool, the child's hyperactive, in pain, screaming, agitated, and you can't see these nails because they are invisible. But the V is one of the nails that we are removing the effects of. If we are focusing on that and also focusing on being super in pain about that and finding blame in everybody else, we miss out on really important windows for change and opportunity because we're focusing on something that might be the one piece of the puzzle, but we're not looking at, okay, what was it that made me choose that? How can I take responsibility and how can I turn this around for good? We'll get to that, but that's just one thing I wanted to say, because for me, it was the same thing that happened when my child was 4 months old and they told me breast milk isn't nutritious enough, you need to do formula. I did it because I believed in authorities instead of the truth that God had put on my heart that I chose to ignore. I did the same when they told me to introduce him to baby foods. And when that had happened, that was like the last straw. And the V, he completely broke down into rashes, hives, infections, coughing. He couldn't breathe. We had to hold him out, his head out the window for him to be able to breathe. He stopped sleeping. He was destroyed. But part of the reason why he was destroyed was because I said yes when I meant no. So I want you to ask yourself right now, can you recognize that voice within you, that truth that God has put on your heart that you ignored, and you listen to the voices of this world instead? Because that's a really important wake-up call that we need to face the grief and pain of for us to change the situation. It doesn't serve us, and it's not beneficial to obsess about blaming and to wallow in the grief about this, because we all have injured children and they are turned around as well. So nothing is too small or big for God. And don't believe people who tell you there's nothing you can do. And I know I'm talking to moms in this community that have lost children to this. And there's no grief bigger than that. I know that is absolutely impossible to get over. But I even have moms who've experienced that with one child and who's got another child with symptoms who are still in the community, still battling for that other child. We cannot afford to lose hope. We cannot afford to be unforgiving, because that disturbs our peace. And I'll tell you later on why that also can prevent your child from actually turning these symptoms around. So let's get to the first milestone. So after my child, or the timeline of the recovery, my child completely regressed after the V and the baby food and the formula, and we were living in the city, and we were completely stressed out, and a lot of noise, a lot of toxins. We ate a pretty standard, pretty unhealthy diet, completely detached from ourselves, drinking red wine, eating candy and chips and crisps, and just trying to survive rather than live. And just honestly, many times during that time, I actually fantasized about not being here anymore. I was so depressed and so anxious. I gained a ton of weight. I used to be super skinny all my life, and all of a sudden it flipped and I gained a lot of weight. I was smelling bad. I had acne all over my body. I had cellulite all over my body. My poop smelled, I'm just being honest, my sweat smelled really bad. So everything was in my face. Emergency situation, woman. This is not a good situation. You have got to change your ways. But I didn't. Yet, I needed more. I needed more pain. I needed more wake-up calls for me to get to that point of no return where I was finally ready to take responsibility and change things. Just want to take a quick break to tell you that this podcast timeline describing how we turned my son's autism symptoms around is sponsored by barefootautismwarriors.com, which is the membership, the community where you can go through the exact process that took my son from stimming, eloping, sleepless nights, screaming, nonverbal autism, aggression, agitation, no learning, no speech development, to none of those symptoms, and living independently and living a neurotypical life as an adult, driver's license, everything, a steady job, Bible study, friends. So this took me 8 years of trial and error, and I did all the practitioners, I did all the diets, I did all the supplements, I did all the force feeding of green juices, the enemas, the detoxes. None of that worked because it never will. One size fits none. Protocols will never be so sophisticated that it will address the specific issues that your child has. You need to become an expert in interpreting your child's symptoms. And until you do, and know exactly how to adjust nutrition and lifestyle and understand God's plan unfolding for you, you'll forever be chasing solutions outside of yourself and God's plan. And you probably already know this, because if you tried all these diets, you've seen some results, but never lasting. And you're just overwhelmed because you don't want to battle anymore. So it took me 8 years of trial and error, but I've condensed it into a step-by-step process which builds a foundation and takes you through the 5 steps in the pathway that I went through, dealing with all the things that you need to do step by step that I did, avoiding the blockers that I fell into and the traps that I fell into that made it take this long for me, and the toolbox you need to solve the issues that your child is struggling with right now. I just want to say I'm not a practitioner. I'm not here to diagnose or treat or give any medical advice. I am just a mom educating and supporting other moms in becoming experts like I had to do for my child. So if that's something you want to do, you want the step-by-step plan, you want the pathway I went through, you want to understand God's plan for symptoms and why symptoms happen and what you can do about it, go to barefootautismwarriors.com, look at the program and look at the free resources there, or send me an email, contact@barefootautismwarriors.com, and let's talk about your situation and what might be possible for you. At the end of this podcast, I'll share with you how you can access my son describing this month what it feels like for him to finally be independent after all these years. how he's doing it, what's been challenging, what he's learned, and some insights and hope for you who have lost hope in this being possible for you. I wanted to hear that from him, how possible this can be. Back to the podcast. And when I say take responsibility, I'm not shaming or guilting. I'm saying the valleys that God takes us through, the problems and symptoms that we're dealing with, they are wake-up calls. And the call, the letter that we're receiving when this happens is something has got to change. Yeah, so after that regression, it was like he disappeared. And I was in denial, complete denial at the time. So the story that we told ourselves was that he was an easy child because he didn't say anything. He would just stare and sit. And I thought, oh, all these other children, they're so difficult to handle. My child wasn't doing anything. He was basically getting more and more apathetic. But then something happened at age 3. I was pregnant and we had our second child, and it was almost like the instant that I gave birth to this second child, to his brother, he went into full-blown autism mode. My oldest son did. And this is something I see a lot. This looks a bit weird, sorry. This happens a lot when you have child number 2, that the child with autism regresses even further. This is where he shifted from being apathetic, and I remember his 2-year-old birthday where he was just staring at the cake. He didn't say anything, he didn't engage with anybody, and thinking that that was a good sign. And then age 3, full-blown aggression, eloping, screaming, flicking light switches all day long, jumping in front of cars if we didn't monitor him, constantly jumping into pools. I had to pick him up with all my clothes on and sunglasses on. I remember during our first vacation together. No sleeping, night terrors all night long, maybe a couple of hours of sleeping. Lining everything up, toys, furniture, clothes. Whenever we wanted to go somewhere, he had to bring everything. He wanted to pack his whole room into a bag. And it just became completely unbearable from one day to the other, especially as a new mom. So we had to separate the family into 2 departments. We couldn't go for car rides, we couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't go shopping together because he was so in danger to himself and to other people. And that's when the whole procedure of diagnosis came into play. So in kindergarten, or in what's it called, nursery, I don't remember what the terms are in English because we were in Denmark at the time. But they suggested that we would get him diagnosed, and that was a long procedure. A little over 2 years in Denmark it took, because it was 2 different organizations or board of experts, and it ended up in the psychiatric system. So that's when he received his diagnosis. He was around 5 when he received the diagnosis, and this is where it gets a bit tricky, because this is a diagnosis that you really cannot shake. And all the things that they wrote in those papers, he has escaped. And this is the hope to you, because there are so many missing links in the diagnosis system, you shouldn't be giving children a label like infantile autism. He also got what would be equivalent to an ADHD diagnosis back then. And all the symptoms were that we were completely broken, hyperactivity, ritualistic behavior, learning difficulties, all the symptoms that I mentioned. But here's the thing that should bring you hope, which is in that diagnosis, they don't look at methylation. Methylation affects neurotransmitters, enzymes, and hormones, and therefore around 98% of children with autism are undermethylated, and that leads to symptoms like hyperactivity, rigidity, autism symptoms, depression in moms, birth defects, having a child with autism symptoms if it's moms that are undermethylated, and it runs in families. They also didn't check, and that was his problem. They also didn't check for nutritional overloads and nutritional deficiencies. Copper toxicity is known to cause these symptoms like aggression, anxiety, sleeplessness, agitation, all the things that he was dealing with due to copper toxicity that can also be regulated through a nutritional approach. They also didn't check his gut. The gut affects the way that the brain reacts. So if there's inflammation, if we have oxidative stress in the body, pyrrole disorder causes sensitivity to light and texture and sound. And they also didn't check for underdevelopment in the brain, the parts of the brain that actually hardwire skills like emotional control, learning, visual processing, being able to learn how to speak. All those things, including nature deficiency. We lived an indoor life, front of TVs, no activity, passive lifestyle. Didn't check for that, didn't ask what our diet was. So the opioids in the gluten and dairy, the glutamates in the processed foods, the histamines in the foods that we ate, all of those and additives and highly processed foods linked to all of these symptoms. So this poor child was given a lifelong diagnosis, which is why I'm not sharing the interview with him publicly, because he needs to live his normal life. He doesn't have to be the one taking the punishment and the judgment from the people who actually don't know how to actually diagnose a child, because they didn't look into that. They didn't say change your diet, address methylation, look at pyrrole disorder, because they don't know. They only look at the brain. They look at it as a neurological disorder. Let me tell you this, autism is not a neurological disorder. And I'll link to a video with a pediatrician telling you how that is and why autism is not a neurological disorder. Please share that video with everybody as well. So that was the reasons, some of the reasons why he had these symptoms. So I went into full-on research mode. I am a journalist. I am a researcher. And when our life basically was destroyed by autism and autism symptoms, and it was purely survival. I was so depressed that I actually often didn't want to live anymore. We didn't sleep. We couldn't go anywhere. Everything was chaos and screaming and sleepless nights. My child didn't want to eat anything except nuggets and peanut butter and sausage. And he was looking very ill. I was feeling very ill. I was obese. I was unhealthy, anxious, depressed. So one summer was that summer of point of no return that I hope you will reach, maybe while you're listening to this podcast episode, where we got worms, parasites, and we couldn't get rid of them. So we'd had a whole summer of red wine and candy and chips and coping and numbing out, and all of a sudden we were all attacked by parasites, and we couldn't get rid of them. No matter what we did for medication, we just could not get rid of them. And so then I started panicking and researching, because it was like it was chronic, and that was scary, because these worms kept creeping out into our beds every night and multiply, and I was panicking. And so I started researching just simple things like, how can we get rid of these worms? And that was actually the first step into understanding how impactful a lifestyle and a diet and a thought pattern change, how important that was. Because guess what happens after that? Okay, so the first thing we did was we got rid of everything that was processed. We got rid of the TV. We got rid of toxins. We got rid of sugar. We got rid of processed foods, and that included gluten and dairy. And within literally weeks, the most significant symptoms like the aggression, the light switch flicking, minimized. He started sleeping at night. And that's when we really thought, okay, we're on to something here. The reason why we did that was that I traveled to medical conferences in the US, listening to pediatricians, neuroscientists, and doctors talking about autism symptoms being reversible. And the doctors that were talking about this, they were the doctors who actually had children themselves with those symptoms, and they had been forced out of grief, out of pain, to understand what's going on physiologically, biologically. And that's what I mean when I say that God sometimes uses a bad situation for good. So when I came back from those conferences and I had met moms with children who no longer had symptoms and moms who had hope, I knew I'm just going to go home and I'm going to get rid of everything that works against my child's sleep and well-being and health and gut health and immune system and energy production and sleep. And so that's what we did. And I just want to tell you, yes, that changed symptoms. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do because my child refused to eat anything. We laid out huge portions of different foods and he didn't want to eat for several days. It was just water. And then eventually he started tasting it. And from then on, we started changing the food and the diet and picky eating and overcoming that. That's a whole other topic for another day. But that changed so that he started sleeping. And the reason why it was the hardest thing that we had to do is that when you remove everything, the addictions, the stimulants, what you use to actually feel like you have something to cope with this situation, you realize who you have become. Because if you drink wine and you eat crisps and you watch TV and you just numb out, you don't feel the grief and the pain of who you have become based on the choices you made and didn't make in your life. So all of a sudden we were confronted with, this is who we've become, this is how unhealthy, this is how unhappy, this is how out of integrity we have become, and this is how ill our children have become because we trusted authorities, we trusted this fallen world instead of trusting God's plan for us because we didn't know God. But so that was step one, and my child was between 5 and 6 when that happened. Then we knew, okay, we're going to do more. We're going to do more. And I want to say to you for hope that because children aren't diagnosed by the right practitioner, so you cannot get a full body diagnosis from someone who's only focusing on mental health. And so that should give you hope that if you look at the whole body, the whole system, that you'll be able to change things as well. So be careful with who you let diagnose your child. Be careful with these stamps that are for life, stigmatizing your child for life. If it is actually an emergency situation, a cry for help, something that needs to change, and then that child doesn't have to live with that diagnosis for the rest of his or her life, or even the symptoms. So we knew we need to do more, and I had this intuition all the time. God started working in my life way before I ever met him. And it was like instructions in my head, and it said, get out of the city, get out of the city. We lived in Copenhagen, one of the biggest cities in the world, and now I know that you cannot heal in the same environment that got you sick. So I didn't know back then, I just knew we've got to get out. And so I quit my job. I didn't know how to provide for my family, and neither did my husband, but we knew we had to get out of the city. So we sold our tiny apartment in the city, and we moved to the ocean and forest in a house there. And then we simply started working as freelancers. And in the beginning, we worked at night, and we trained and recovered and worked on our children and our family's health, the protocol, the turnaround process that I'm now teaching other moms. We did that in the daytime, and it was massive. But this was when he was between 5 and 7 as well. So what we added on there, which should give you hope as well, was we went into nature, we had the children sleep outside as much as possible, exercise outside for hours every day. You can check out another video, so I'm referring to a lot of videos that I'm linking to at the end of this video as well, if you're watching on YouTube. So I interviewed my husband about this process from his viewpoint as well, and I want you to take a look at that as well. Because the thing is that the brain needs to be developed by physical exercise. And skills like social skills, eye tracking, visual processing, learning, emotional control, storing information and turning it into skills like comprehension and speaking and writing, all these things, and decision making and controlling hyperactivity is actually something that you can learn and hardwire those skills by stimulating certain parts of the brain that hardwires for that. If you are passive indoor lifestyle family, if the child doesn't crawl for long enough, walks too soon, spend a lot of time in baby jumpers or baby walkers, that can actually end in front of screens, that hampers that development in the brain. Luckily, we got started with brain development exercises and physical exercises almost immediately after we moved into nature. So 2 things happened that should give you hope. First of all, stimulating the brain, being outdoors, key. You have to get your child outside, exposed to daylight, because the organs in the body respond to daylight. So it regulates hormones, it regulates sleep, it regulates mood, and it's beneficial for the nervous system as well. So God created us very wisely to be in the nature that He created us for. So if we are indoors, the brain cannot develop. And so nature deficiency is a massive thing, both because of light deficiency, but also because it limits the brain's ability to develop the way that God intended, which is through movement, balance, eye tracking exercises. Because if you were in nature, you'd be hunting with your parents, or you'll be crawling, or you'll be on your mom's back. You'd be in nature stimulating that part of the brain that hardwires the skills that we just talked about that these children lack. You'd be looking at birds far away. You'd be looking at insects close up. You'd be doing a lot of balancing and cross-coordination exercises. And those are the ones that actually hardwire the skills that these children lack. So physical exercise, being in nature, was step number 2. And those steps, so it was lifestyle change, moving, being in nature, neurological exercises, and that meant that my child could gradually wean out of special needs. And here's what we did next. I just want to say before I tell you what happened, which was incredible, that the Doman method and neurofeedback was not it for us. Way too time consuming, doesn't create lasting results. We did our own version of brain development training right from the beginning, which involved balance, cross-coordination, and without knowing it, eye tracking and releasing stress hormones in daily runs, and just incredible things that, because you need change to last. You need to constantly build new skills. And the Doman method, which we tried in the beginning, it literally consumed our whole day. It took around 4 hours every single day to do that. So it broke us. It's not possible. Neurofeedback is where you're on a chair, you're passive on a chair, and you're not actually hardwiring the pathways in the brain. So that's not creating any lasting change either. But what happened from this was we got rid of the stress and the toxins in the city, and we dealt with nature deficiency. He started to become more kind. He started to develop speech. Even though he was switching the words so that it wasn't grammatically correct, he started to speak. He started to be able to write. His personality changed. He became more kind. We could have social interactions. He was able to be together with us as a family. And that's when I decided to tell the school, I'm going to take him home and homeschool him for 1 year, just only focusing on the things that we have seen working, and see how far we can get him. And within 1 year, he was able to go back into mainstream school. totally incredible. So the hope for you is that if you go back and hardwire and rewire the brain is plastic, you can change it at any age. But if you're looking for me to tell you exactly what foods to eat, what exercises to eat, what to do for your child is so unique. I cannot tell you what you need to do. I can show you how to become the expert like I had to be for my child. But you gotta understand that this is why the practitioners, the therapies, the protocols, the diets out there don't work. It's because you need to collect all the healing puzzles pieces for your child. And that's a unique journey for you that God has chosen you for. And that's why the protocols don't work. Our children's needs change all the time, so we need to become an expert in interpreting them and adjust accordingly. So between 7 and 8, we homeschooled, we continued down the same path. And we made a lot of mistakes along the way. We did the GAPS diet, basically something similar to that. We did the specific carbohydrate diet. We did all the testing, massive amounts of supplements, the protocols, the therapies, the ABA kind of therapy, the behavioral therapy. And we simply had to stop all of that because it gave a bit of improvement and then he got worse. Some of the things like the specific carbohydrate diet and the green juices and the supplements and the methylfolate made him significantly worse. So regression happened massively. And that's because children with autism often are undermethylated. They are folate intolerant. If you give them folic acid or if you give them methylfolate, you'll make matters worse when it comes to tantrums and behaviors and all those things. And I've linked to a video at the end of this where you can learn much more about that. We don't have time to dive into that now, but that's why supplements and protocols don't work, because every child needs an individualized, specific approach, and that's what I teach moms to learn. So after 1 year, he could go back into school, back into mainstream, have friends, and no longer be in that whole special needs, special education prison, is what I would say. And that's when the psychologist that was dealing with him at the time said he doesn't belong in the special needs section anymore. I would say that he no longer is on the spectrum. And this is the first time when my son was 8, we looked at each other, my ex-husband, because unfortunately, because I didn't know God, I got a divorce later. But we looked at each other and we said, he no longer has autism. So what happened next was a long phase of me realizing that my healing and my health, or lack of, my nervous system, my heart, my lack of self-understanding and my lack of walk in integrity affected my child. And the more I healed, the more my child could heal. And from 8 until 16, he just developed massively, explosively. He was able to move to a boarding school for 1 year to go in to learn more music and live there. And then he came back to live with me and my then boyfriend in England, because I got a divorce. This is a longer story. You have to go back and listen to our whole story for that part of the journey. But he completed that education in the mainstream, and then we moved to England. Then he learned English. He went to college. He passed his exams. He got a driver's license. His humor developed. He had friends in a different country. He applied for jobs and got jobs in a different country. He became more and more neurotypical. It would be unfair to even talk about autism at this point. And then just fast forward to now. So we just kept on doing this. Clean living, no alcohol, no late nights, no gaming, no processed foods except maybe on Saturdays once per week. And then exercise and brain stimulation all the way through. Fast forward to 2022, where God saved me out of New Age spirituality and totally changed me and my children's lives because we all came to Christ. I moved out of my ungodly relationship and we all came together to save up and be able to fend for ourselves and pay the bills and get food. And then we moved back to Denmark, bought a tiny house and a backup apartment, which is the final breakthrough that's happened now, is that my son now lives independently in that tiny house. It happened coincidentally because we were living there together. And so I was kind of monitoring and shopping and planning the meals and the cooking and kind of cuddling him, like being the mom still. But then God intervened and he made it impossible for me to live there because the house needs to be renovated in the rooms that I was living in. So he is now living alone, meal planning, managing his budget, cooking for himself, getting up, walking the dog in the morning, going to work, exercising, eating healthily. He's living the life that I didn't dream of being possible for him in the beginning, and all glory to that. The last pieces of the puzzle was definitely the walk with God, turning away from idols, turning away from practitioners, turning away from thinking that we need to look to other people for the solution, but that we need to go through a process of understanding and letting God reveal his plans for us. So the last things to develop for him was humor, sarcasm, being able to have deep conversations when we go and visit the Bible study groups, and develop friendships with that capacity in mind, and getting a steady job and being able to maintain that. So I wanted to share this to give you a full timeline. So from age 18 to 22, still a lot of development happening. So before we jump to the step-by-step, the 6 takeaways from this podcast episode, I just want to say to you, if you want to listen to the interview that I just made with him, where he talks about how it's been for him, how he's managing money, how he's staying away from unhealthy things and exercising, how it's been to come to Christ for him, you can go to my membership and listen to it there, but it's only for people in that private group because I want to protect his privacy, and that's what he's asked me to do. So with that said, let's get to the 6 takeaways for how did we do it and how can you mimic the process. Let's move to the 6 steps that you need to implement and understand for you to turn symptoms around. And these are also the explanations why, if you tried all the things and nothing has worked, this is the reason why. And I want to say to you again, every child's different. God has a plan for you and your child. When someone tells you there's nothing you can do, it is not God's voice. New Age and functional medicine and therapies can be a massive distraction. I believe that New Age is the enemy's attempt to distract you away from God's plan, and nothing like homeopathy, kinesiology, energy medicine, spiritual healing is something that I would ever advise you doing, because that's what's caused most distress and distraction. And it has prolonged my family's healing process, and it caused my divorce. That's what I'm completely convinced of, because I was in pride, I was in vanity, I was in covetousness. I wanted freedom. I was exhausted after the turnaround process, and I will say, do not get a divorce, because divorce is a turnaround blocker. It causes a lot of grief for the kids, a lot of trauma for both of my kids. It actually halts the development of the brain, and then it causes a lot of grief in their nervous system and in their heart, and it's not God's plan. If you're struggling in your marriage, you're going to struggle even more as divorcees. So, that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Don't do it, because it is the dark side. And I have recorded other podcast episodes about that. So, I'll link to them too. I'll link to a podcast episode about my breakup so you can understand what's wrong there. Or maybe I should link to the one about spiritual healing. I'll do that as an end screen. Okay. So number one step to implement to turn symptoms around is to understand that autism and ADHD, depression, anxiety, all these things that we as moms and children deal with, it is never a one cause reason or one solution kind of deal. Never. So it's not the type of weed. It's not the detox. It's not the poke. It is not the toxins. It's not the gut. Specifically, it is many different things, and every child has a unique journey. It is at least 5 to 10 different things. What I'm good at is laying out a pathway and give you a toolbox so that you can learn how to unscramble what are the pieces to my healing puzzle. What's the complete puzzle that God has chosen for me? What's the plan? And how do I step away from all the distractions that are actually exacerbating symptoms now so that I can get my child to as much independence and peace and best possible outcome for the future as humanly possible? Because we know that these children are high in the statistics when it comes to suicidal tendencies, addictions, ending up in prisons, institutions. I forgot to mention that my child was in those on weekends to give us breaks. And had we not changed all these things and started listening to God's plan, he would probably still be there. I was saved out of the New Age 4 years ago. I woke up in the night and I had this massive love in my heart. And I had never felt anything like that. And when I woke up the next day, I could not look at anything New Age. No cards, angel cards, spiritual influencers, homeopathic remedies, spiritual healers, anything like that, energy medicine. I could see the way that God looked at it, how dark it was, how much of a distraction it was. And Holy Spirit is working around and God is working in you before you dedicate your life to Him. So understand that that plan is a sacred assignment from God. Don't delegate that responsibility. I'll gladly help you with the roadmap and the toolbox to connect to that truth. That's what I do now, but we do have to give glory to God, and you have to understand that He has a plan for you. And the enemy has a plan, which is the usual plan for the enemy, to kill, lie, and destroy your health, your family, your child, and your effort to turn this around. Number 2 is every child is different. Protocols will never work. A diet that will help one child will make another child worse. And that's because if a child is undermethylated, it cannot be vegan. You will need methionine, you will need meat to help your child. And a child that's undermethylated needs a completely different diet than a child that's overmethylated. Every child is different. Every child's dietary needs change all the time, which is why diets, extreme diets and protocols will never work. And a functional medicine practitioner will never be able to replace that knowledge and the fact that God created foods to heal us as well. So protocols will never work. Don't do any supplements unless you know your child's biotype, because any supplement can have either the exacerbation effect or it can help. But what helps now doesn't mean that it will help long term, because you don't know what the knock-on effects are. So don't ever do a multivitamin. Don't ever start supplements until you know how to determine your child's biotype. Send me an email, contact@barefootautismwarriors.com if you want to talk about this. Number 3, the state of your heart affects the state of your child's health. And that's because science now shows that the heart has its own nervous system. It has its own brain. The brain responds to the communication that comes from the heart. There are more communication lines coming from the heart to the brain than the other way around. So children mimic your heart rate. This has been proven scientifically as well. The state of the heart, either stress or peace, will result in neurotransmitters that either tell the body everything's horrible, stress, alarm, alarm, take care, danger, danger. Which happens if you're negative, if you're thinking negative thoughts, if you are in fight and flight and stressed all the time, if you don't know how to find peace, which is why your health affects your child's turnaround process. And if you're unhealthy and negative and stressed and you don't know how to deal with that, or you're feeling helpless because you're listening to these lies of this world, this fallen world, you won't be able to change your child, because the child mimics our heart rate. And stress in mom will result in problems with the immune system, detoxification pathways, gut health. And because the child mimics you and the heart and the nervous system, it will cause the same problems for your child. Meaning you can do all the diets you want, you can do all the protocols you want, unless you fix your own heart and health and nervous system, your child won't get to a better place. Number 4, regression is inevitable. Don't feel like regression is a failure. Don't be afraid when you're experiencing regression, whether you have your first episode of regression or you experience it when you start the turnaround process. Regression is an invitation to look deeper into what causes symptoms specifically for your child, what's your child's tantrum triggers when it comes to lifestyle, food, nutrition, environment. So every time we have a regression, it's actually great, because we then get to know the child better, the symptoms better, and we become better and better at adjusting our approach according to that. So you'll become an expert in your child's triggers and how to adjust accordingly. Number 5, it takes a year to clear up the diet and the damages of the lifestyle, a year to repair. So one thing is to get rid of the triggers. Then it takes the body a year to repair all the gut lining, getting the immune system up and running, the body clocks, the brain, the nervous system. And then it takes a year to start redeveloping the skills that they missed out on, which is why don't miss one day. Every day counts, every week counts, because you don't want too many gaps where your child is not developing. If your child is apathic or stimming or screaming, the child cannot develop. So you need to understand that if you don't start now, you don't have that year to clear out and that year to repair. And then you're already 2 years behind when it comes to developing skills. So get started today. Send me an email, contact@barefootautismwarriors.com, or go to barefootautismwarriors.com so we can find a plan for you. Download one of the free resources just so that you get started today. Finally, the final step is God has a plan. Here are 3 reasons why we experience disease or peace. So first of all, there's the ways of the world that we already discussed: methylation, pyrrole disorder, copper toxicity, lifestyle, gut toxicity, living in the city, all these things in this natural realm, the fallen world, that does make us ill, and we do need to look at that and address that and change that. But then there's the spiritual part of the journey, which is all about your walk with God, your walk with others, your walk through autism and symptoms. Are you right with God? Is there still a hole in your heart that you're trying to fill with practitioners and potions and lotions and supplements and idols and priests or deliverance ministries or healers or whatever it is, or other moms experience? Because if you are not right in your heart, you know how that heart affects your child's health. Neurotransmissions like oxytocin, which is coding for bonding and emotional intelligence and actual well-being, dopamine levels, it's all affected by the heart, and the heart affects the brain and the neurotransmission. So that's the spiritual part of the health. Are you walking with God? How are you walking in integrity? Are you at peace? If this is your missing link, you'll experience a lot of hopelessness and helplessness and anxiety and fear. And there's another thing about this spiritual journey, which will be the final message for you today, which is God uses our mess for good. He used my mess up, my ungodly behavior, my gluttony, my addictions, my vanity, my pride, my selfishness, to create disease in me and my child, so that I'm now spreading hope and glorifying him. So he used my mess. Doesn't mean that he created all that. I created that, but he's using it for good. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that God is going to heal your child miraculously, so that he's going to glorify himself through that if you glorify him. So don't glorify yourself. Don't glorify any experts. Don't glorify anything and anybody but him. And then finally, God does use dark valleys, problems, disease, and illness to discipline us, to show us where we still have doors open to the spiritual realm, because we are battling not just in this fleshy world, but against rulers and principalities and evil forces in the unseen realms. Ephesians 6, go and read it in the Bible. So if we have doors open, if we're still worshiping idols in the New Age, or ourselves, or practitioners, or our bodies, or even the child, or if we are still in pride and vanity. And pride and vanity can also be grumbling against God and being bitter and wanting something different than the job he has actually given you. He's given you this work. He's put you in this situation to test you. Are you going to listen to the lies of the world and the enemy, which is to kill, lie, and destroy, that this is never going to be changeable, this is for life, it's neurological, you got to be proud of autism, you've got to accept autism and not do anything about it, or you're a bad person. All the lies of the world, where you're looking to man for solutions and for worldly things for solutions. Or unforgiveness and bitterness, that can be another sin that God is disciplining you to look at. So that is actually really important, and I'll write some Bible verses that you can go and read below, so that you can study this further. Actually, I'll link to a book that you can read that's all about this, written by a wonderful woman called Marcy Julin, and I'll also link to one of her videos below in the description. So I hope this was useful. If this is something that ignites a fire in you and you want to change your life, go to barefootautismwarriors.com, contact at barefootautismwarriors.com, and let's start glorifying God through this challenge that you have.